Yeah, the stream is live. Hello everyone, welcome to the session. Another session in the row where we are doing a lot of webinars to educate our visitors and educate our listeners on the DPDPA, how we are shaping up the Indian regulatory compliances, and also trying to help all our listeners, partners, and bring all the knowledge on the table on top of what we have done, what you know. So today the webinar will be on the consent evidence piece, specifically on the how you can be audit ready. So that's the whole idea, because everybody's asking nowadays, okay, is there a certification for DPDPA or not? So that is a big challenge which is in the market. Together with me today is Nakib, partner at CMS Indus Law, and Rahul, who is also a partner in the 𝗪𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 and Sullivan Partners. I would love to ask them to introduce themselves. Nakib, can you go first, please?
Hey, hi everyone. So I'm a partner at CMS Indus Law. I'm a partner in the technology, media, telecoms practice. Uh, Indus Law is one of the largest law firms in the country with over 450 odd lawyers. I have been specifically doing technology, media, telecoms, gaming, fintech, and data for a very long time. In fact, I started off doing data when I started my profession, my career. So I have about 11 years of experience in data. And the last couple of years, we've been doing a lot of DPDP related work. Over to you, Rahul.
Thank you. Thank Nakib. Hello, everybody. I am Rahul Jain. I work for Hammurabi and Solomon Partners, Bangalore office. I take care of South India. And I am into practice since last 2 decades. I also practice primarily in technology, media, telecom, and in data privacy. I am practicing since my Flipkart Walmart days when the Puttaswamy judgment came, and we were grappling with the data subjects because a lot of data subjects in that particular company are from GDPR as well. So yeah, it's like quite a long journey in data protection. Over to you, Himanshu.
Thank you. Thanks for you gentlemen to be here on the call, on the webinar, and then looking forward to have a very good interactive session today. First thing first, the enterprise challenges, right? Rather me telling what we are seeing from the GOTA's point of view, I will quickly ask Nakib if you give us some challenges which you have seen, because you both have been in the industry for a long time. So quickly, what challenges you
So I
face
think,
or you have seen? Yeah, go
yeah.
ahead.
See, I think the DPDP is very clear as to what is it from a compliance standpoint that an organization needs to do. Consent needs to be freely given, specific, unambiguous, via an affirmative action, and companies are actually striving towards making sure that adequate consents are obtained. Now, one of the key challenges is, okay, while we sort of set in motion, let's say while we create policies, while we create privacy notices to make sure that we comply with the statute to the teeth and we obtain adequate consents, how do you actually record it? Or once you're done with obtaining consent, how do you store the fact that you obtained consent? When is it that the consent was obtained? How the manner in which consent was obtained? So I think there are issues that organizations are grappling with from a more so from a technical side. I think from a legal front, it's generally been quite straightforward, and companies have sort of started building up policies, changing processes in terms of how data is collected. So I think from a technical front uh, is where a lot of organizations are actually finding
So
it
Nakib, if I may interrupt you,
challenging.
so you're saying legally, you are from a legal background, so legally job was done very well from long time. Now it's a technical component where
So so
uh,
so
records.
so see, what I'm saying is, again, there are changes. See, one thing a lot of the organizations sort of don't realize is that it's DPDP is not just a legal compliance. So I think that reality check is actually taking a lot of time for most organizations. They think, "Acha, theek hai, we'll probably just build in some policies, have privacy notices, and then the compliance is done." But that is just the beginning. That's just the starting point of compliance. I think that second leg is where a lot of the organizations are actually finding it a bit challenging.
Interesting, very interesting. Rahul, what do you think about it? It's a legal problem or a tech problem?
So I think it's a legal requirement, but it's a technical solution. Why? Because if you see Section 8, very categorically, you're talking about that reportability of the data protection officer as up till the board level. So what I believe that board worry about, because if you see in the hierarchy, we're talking about data principle, that's the main thing, and then the data of the data principle, and then consent comes. So it's the third most important thing in hierarchy, because without which you're unable to process the data. So of course boards are involved, and how this consent has to be taken care of is important. So if you're talking about consent as a HR paperwork, then earlier, now it is a financial reporting, because the consequences we have seen, they're running into crores. So that is one. Secondly, what I believe, single consent failure can expose you to risk. So of course automated data processing is very much important. Thirdly, as we know that board is worried about the regulator, and finally, in terms of data being processed by the external vendors, if you are not aware about it in a consent form, then it's a problem for you. So uh, consent governance framework has to be there, and it's a systemic compliance risk, and therefore it is a serious thing to handle in a very very systematic manner, and therefore board, it's a board level issue which needs to be catered at the annual general meetings.
So Rahul, the consent we are talking about here is not just coming from the data principles, right? It can come from your employees, or it can be principal, can be an employee, can be the customer, can be the vendor, right? So the consent can come from all of these areas.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what about the reporting side of it? How are we? Like I remember in the past, like you mentioned, it's an Excel report. An auditor comes, he checks whether you have the PDF, where is the PDF, where is the Excel, open it up, it is OneDrive somewhere, and then you show it to them. But then the legitimacy of the records, because they're prepared 1 week 1 week before of the audit, or 3 months before the audit, but they're not maintained regularly in a structured way. Now, what I see happening across the globe, whether it's GDPR or others, you have a regular compliance, where the technology is playing a big role, like digital records are maintained, and also they're immutable. So that those things, and if specifically talking about DPDPA, the consent record has to be immutable, and that company has to prove it. So technology becomes the key in that sense. That's what I have seen. Let's move on to the auditor's lens, because there I think your input is more important. How auditor is seeing this? We can have it technically. What are the conditions you look forward, or you have seen in your experiences when you are sitting in the audits, that
Yeah.
how the consent is evaluating this piece? Can you help us
Yeah.
now?
Yeah. So you see, I believe that auditors believe that when you are coming for the audit, you are totally ready about it. You're ready on the audit part, and you are able to trust the system, because here it's not like that they are coming and then you're getting ready. It's not like that. You need to be totally ready with respect to your evaluation. So what I believe, the evidence which will be shown through tools to the auditor has to be there vis-a-vis, as per the requirements of even the regulator, or the Data Protection Board of India, or for the courts. So therefore, what I believe, what auditor has to evaluate, auditor has to evaluate that whether the evidence which we are being given in the audit report are having a adequate design adequacy in terms of framework, in terms of quality. So that's why I was always saying that here we will be talking about the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, wherein in 2023 only the entire Evidence Act has been what do you say, reformulated, and digital evidence comes into picture. Evidence as a whole has been considered as a digital record. So a lot of things have been created, and I believe in that scenario we need to understand how the audit will be taking care of it, and whether we are having a proper requirements as per the audit. So if it is there, then there's nothing, there's no problem with it, and we need to be ready with respect to when the audit is taking place.
Thank you, Rahul.
Sorry, Himanshu, just
Thank
to
you.
sort of
Yeah.
add there, again, just to the whole audit, the audit and auditor point. See, one of the key elements with regard to any evidence is its admissibility, and admissibility is linked to whether it is an untampered evidence or not. So I think that is actually extremely critical, because if an auditor, let's say, see, anyone can actually create an Excel sheet with logs saying that this is the consent that I've obtained, and probably put it on and upload it on our system. So I think one of the key elements is to show that the logs have not been tampered with, or rather, again, you said so again, so I
Immutable.
think yeah, immutable. So I think that is quite critical.
But if you see the next question, which I wanted to focus on, is on the related one. Some challenges on the enterprise scale audit findings. So I see these related, but can you emphasis on a bit of them where you have seen more challenges on when it goes to
Yeah, so I
enterprise
think,
level? Yeah.
yeah, I think, see, there are challenges and there will be challenges. Enterprises are actually collecting data from multiple from different stakeholders or from different data principles. It could be from employees, could be from vendors, or vendors, suppliers, and it could be from customers, or it could be from any other third party. And the systems that they've actually built in for each is actually very different. In most instances, there are no systems which are actually built in for employee data, while again there is no consent requirement with regard to processing of employee data for employment purposes. You still have to comply with the other obligation under the DPDP. How do you actually ensure compliance with it? That becomes tricky. See, with regard to B2C entities, they typically have a proper data flow built in specifically for customers. But then let's say with regard to vendors, with regard to third party service provider, there is no proper system which is actually built in. So I think, so because of this, you will actually see that consents might have been obtained with only with regard to one or two different categories of data principles, and with regard to the rest, there might actually not be adequate, like, consents might have been obtained, but then it's not documented and it's not streamlined in the way it is supposed to be streamlined. I think that is where you will actually see a lot of challenges, and this is something which a lot of clients are now facing, because now they've started doing the whole DPDP gap assessment. One of the first thing is discovery, and in discovery they are realizing it's the documents, the consents, policies, everything is haphazard, everything is available in an haphazard manner. I think that is obviously creating challenges, and will in future also create challenges, unless until you have a system in place for every single data set that the organization is collecting.
Correct, correct, correct. So you moved on to solutioning, so that's why I moved on to the next slide directly so that we can make it more relevant. See,
So Himanshu, I just want to add on
yeah,
that.
please, Rahul, go ahead, go ahead. Yeah.
Only one 30 seconds I'll take. So I think there has to be a common source of truth. And the consent which we have taken 6 months back should also look like what you have taken so historical consent should not be a guesswork. There has to be a single source of truth, and therefore managing these consents has to be in a very, very uh, reproducible manner. Because if you see in data processing, it is talking about partially or whole in an automated format. So partially is basically talking about consent which were there before the act came into picture. So, and those consents may be there in a not a non-automated forms. So now the question comes that how you will automate them, because as soon as the act come into picture and the those timelines have been given, the notice has to be issued for the earlier consents which have been taken before the act came into picture. So what I believe here is the single source of truth is a requirement, and you are able to reproduce the consent which have been taken say 6 months back.
Correct, agreed. Not only that, like the challenge is how you collect the consent, because while we are designing the solution, every day we get a challenge from customers. Okay, proof that it's immutable, right? That nobody can change it. Just but the word you use, single point of truth. So the technical design of the solution becomes critical here, because if I am able to tamper, forget about the tampering the Excel files and Word, but if I am able to tamper the tables and records where the consent is stored, it still is not safe, right? So it's not immutable. So we have techniques implemented at least in GoTrust, and I hope all solutions have also done something similar. That even if you want to create or tamper evidence, there is audit log for it. So audit logs are so strong that when you logged in, what data you modified, why you modified, is all logged. So that helps to make sure that the validity of the system is at par. You can trust the system. And then let's come back to the topic. Otherwise, we're going to go. We all are very emotional about the consent, so we can. So for our audience, the consent evidence readiness. How the consent evidence is correct, or it's what do you call it when we can say that this is the evidence and this is perfect. Few options are produce accurate, what you just mentioned, Akiva and Rahul, I'm just going to repeat quickly. Produce accurate, completely timely consents, prove consent lifecycle management. That's what I just mentioned about, the tampering and everything, when it was collected, the timeline, the timestamp, the purpose for which bonds, very important. We'll come back to this point, the purpose. Support audit, regulatory, and legal scrutiny. Because let's focus on the purpose, because this is very important. Because as per DPDP, if I'm collecting an email ID from a customer, why I'm collecting it? If I'm collecting an email ID from an employee, why I'm collecting it? And if employee is a customer and also a customer, then you have a two purpose tagged to the same email ID. Now, I'm trying to make it more complex because this is what we have seen in the tool. When data comes in, same email IDs were tagged to 5 different purposes. And then the collection points are different. Collection point means touch points with the customer are different, or the employees are different. So, Nakib, can you add a bit on it? What you have seen in the past, or what you're seeing now when you do this compliance?
So I think, again, see, in the past, every time, again, pre-DPDP, at every instant when someone collected data points, they would generally have one detailed purpose clause saying we're using it for XYZ, and then there would be one clause towards the end saying for any other purpose that we deem fit or we deem necessary. And under DPDP, that is something which won't fly, because DPDP emphasizes on specificity of purpose. So when you're collecting data, you need to specifically call out what are the different purposes for which you are actually collecting the data, and your usage should be limited only to those purposes. And I think and the thing is, the moment you are done with one particular purpose, then the whole data retention clauses or other data deletion clauses gets triggered. So I think the way or the different purposes for which entities have been processing data for in the past, now they'll have to specifically call it out, and that's something which will actually go in your privacy notice too, clearly calling out that these are the different purposes for which we're going to be using. One thing which we'll probably start seeing is multiple checkboxes. Are you okay with us using your data for reaching out to you for marketing purposes? There'll be a separate checkbox. Are you okay with us using your data for providing services to you? That will probably be a different checkbox. So I think
Correct.
you'll probably start seeing
that is very clear on that statement. But I would like to make it more, more some kind of takeaway for our listeners. I would like to ask one level deeper question. You just mentioned that the purpose will be mentioned in the notice, right?
yeah.
Now, question is to Rahul. Rahul, you have seen many times happening this. Now, what happens if the notice is changing or the purpose is changing, vice versa? Because how should we communicate to the customer? What has to be done then? Please help us. I'll give a live example also. Maybe take 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Explain this. Because this is very important
Yeah.
for us to understand how to
Yes.
communicate, when to communicate with the customer, when we have to reconsent, right? So can you please take this and give us an answer to this?
Yeah. So see, we have seen in a couple of our marketplace platform clients, wherein this particular thing has to be considered as a granular consent. So primarily it's a means and purpose of processing, because means and purpose of processing data is also putting a liability on fiduciary or on the processors or on the principal. And this means and processing is actually talking about the entire retention and even the deletion of the data which is there with the fiduciary or with the processor. So as soon as you have taken a data for the purpose of, say, transaction of a shipment, and post that purpose has been solved, so automatically within the time duration there is some retention time, post which it has to be automatically deleted. So what I believe and what I means to say over is that means and purpose will define the entire duration of data should be retained in the system of the data fiduciary. And as soon as that purpose has been solved, it should be automatically deleted from the system because the purpose has been taken care of. And therefore, for different earlier, the consents are being taken in a very umbrella kind of form. Now it is in the form of a granular consent management, wherein for each purpose you need to take the consent in a different manner because people are not able to understand that when they are being spammed. So therefore, means and purpose in itself is creating the entire life cycle of the data in the system and then it being deleted finally.
Perfect. And also, in case the purpose is changing, Nakib, can you add on that part? Have you seen the change in a
Yeah.
specific purpose or specific notice for which we have to reconsent, or no, at least in design principles now that we have to send the reconsent to the customers? Can you give some example on that part?
So I think every time you are, let's say, revising or adding a new purpose, there is a need to obtain I won't say reconsent. You need to obtain a fresh consent for it because it's not a reconsent. It's a new purpose for which you're probably collecting data. So there's a requirement to obtain consent again. So let's say, for example, you've signed up on Uber, and let's say, okay, in fact, I'm not getting an example. Uber might be a wrong example. So basically, let's say you've given your data to a data fiduciary
So
for,
I will give an example. Let's say Uber
yeah,
has merged the Uber Eat apps and Uber car service, right? And now
yeah,
they're adding
yeah,
more parcel services to it. So you log in on the app. Earlier it was a car
yeah,
taxi
cab
booking
services.
app. Now it
Yeah,
has 5 more service lines. So
yeah.
should Uber reconsent, or as a new consent has to be produced? What should be the
So,
situation? Yeah.
so see, technically, it will be a new service altogether, and that new service, let's say Uber started a food app wherein it requires data to be shared to the restaurant partners. Then obviously it's a new purpose, and then there's also sharing of data which is happening with restaurant partners, which is something which you haven't consented for at the get-go. What you initially consented for was only for let's say availing taxi services. Now there's a new service that you're availing, and there's a new service for which Uber is actually collecting and processing your data. So ideally, you would actually require. So Uber would ideally require is required to obtain specific consents from you with regard to each of these new services too. So that's something that we'll actually start seeing a lot. Now,
What do
now
you
see
think
there might
about it?
be,
Sorry,
yeah.
Nakib.
So see,
Just yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, see, there might be instances. Let's say Uber, basically started you've signed up for, let's say, Uber taxi services, but then Uber has started bike services too. So I think what we've started seeing and what we've started also doing is, again, while specificity is key. Now, if there are minor variations in the service, then ideally you actually don't need to go and obtain a fresh consent. You can probably draft your privacy notice in such a manner that even certain minor variations get covered in the initial consent. So that's something that we'll probably start seeing in industry, and that's something that we've started and advising clients on to.
Okay. I just wanted to get 2 cents on Rahul. Are you seeing the same thing happening, or you experience it differently?
Yeah, so I believe there could be an interpretation issue in this because while I have registered, say, for the first time on Uber app and for the traveling purpose, but generally, if you see Uber Eats are all these locations which are there in the route itself, and then only it will be feasible for me to directly order while traveling. So could be a allied purpose wherein I have given my consent, and of course for the giving the improving the customer experience, they want to give they want to process my data for the purpose of sharing of delivering of food to me as well. I think this could be like more sort of an interpretation issue that whether such kind of allied purposes can be resolved in one notice or not, because it is just increasing my customer experience. So we need to see that how this has to be taken care of in future, because some people take it as a nuisance, some people take it as a very good customer experience. So we need to see that how the
So I can
trajectory.
tell you European experience, because after GDPR came in, right now, 6-7 years down the line, if we see the consent is not being asked properly, we hesitate in general to buy any product online. And you
Yeah.
will not believe that 80% of the transactions, at least in Netherlands, is now cashless. everything is digital. So 85, that was the number. So it's pretty huge. And you see, if that's the volume of transactions happen digital, the digital trust becomes the key. And with this, implementing right consent in a manner, you're building a big trust with your customers, and then it adds up a lot of value, in the value chain. So you customer might feel annoyed in the beginning, but this is a change of habit. Because as soon as the antitrust comes into that, okay, I don't know, I'm buying from this website, it's legitimate or not. But these things make it more legit. So looking at the time, I have to move on. Otherwise, we can discuss this. But again, quickly summarizing it up, because I went quite deep into it. The core elements of audit consent, like it's mentioned, it has
Yeah.
to be a centralized framework to govern structured consent data, like the timestamp, like I mentioned, identity, from whom you're collecting your channel, you're collecting it, right, and what purpose it is for. That becomes the key of it. Version control becomes very important, and same goes with like I've used the word immutable consent logs. Audit log becomes really important here. Automated linkage to the processing of system report aligned to audit requirements. So what you need to what you want that you collect, and that's what the audit requirement says. Let's move on. Integration with enterprise governance frameworks considered as a part of assurance ecosystem. This part, it's very interesting because when I look at it, we have multiple actors playing into in the game. Now we just talked about few actors before in the 5 minutes ago. We have employee, we have a vendor, we have a customer. Those are the three major players. In some places there might be some partners and something more, but we have to manage our roles like this. Then the interaction happening with them, the touch points, the word which you used in the past, where is those defined? So they are all part of your OPA DPIs. So then automatically what is defined on the policy side, on the paperwork, exactly that is coming out into your technical system. Now, of course, you can manually go through, do the ROPA DPIs, and then identify the purpose and register them. How we do it at GoTrust is, if you do ROPA DPI on the tool, automatically all the purposes are configured. When the purposes are configured, those purposes are automatically tagged to the department, because we know the ROPA and DPI. They are tagged to the PIs which are collected, because it's coming from ROPA and DPIs. It's also tagged to all the third-party vendors, because you defined in ROPA and DPIs which third party are going to give the data. So we create a 360 map, and then every data subject giving consent, we precisely have a map how it should be done, basically. And then finally, there's a PDI, personal data inventory, which collects everything from the ecosystem to make sure it is accessible, available, viable. Yeah. But again, my focus today in this call will be to ask you guys how the vendor and third-party risk management is getting involved. Because what I said, it's very common. After 1 year, we have read a lot. But if you help the audience with how the vendor and third-party risk management is done with the consent, will be way better learning curve for our audience here. So, Nikki, how are we collecting vendor consents, or what should be collected in the vendor consent? Can you help us with that?
See, I think with regard to vendors or third-party data that is actually collected, in most instances, these vendors or third parties are organizations. But then there is POC data of these organizations which is collected. Now, how do you obtain consent? So typically what we've seen and what we've advised in the industry is it becomes very difficult for the organization to specifically reach out to the individuals and obtain his or her consent. So typically your agreement will actually shift the onus of collection, consents, and compliance with DPDP onto the vendor's entity. So let's say if I'm representing Indus Law, and one GoTrust and Indus Law is actually signing a contract. So for you to specifically reach out to me, get my details, or let's say I have someone from the accounts department as a SPOC, for you to reach out specifically to that accounts department individual and get his details becomes very tricky. So ideally, what we do is we just shift the onus of compliance, or rather shift the onus of collection of data, collection or obtaining consents, issuance of privacy notices on the vendor or third party. So that's something that we've actually seen happen.
Rahul, how far this will continue on the DPDPA. Can we do that for a long time, or auditors gonna challenge us with that? As per DPDPA, let's focus on that, because vendor third party is key for success of any organization.
So see, I believe see vendors are basically customers as well as buyers of our services together, and the language of the notice is very much important when we are processing the vendor data, and of course the metrics is almost same. They also have a financial information. They also have their uh, personally identifiable information. So I think the important task over here is that how we are taking care of it, because it has to be a different consent management framework, and the different timelines are there, and of course different data has to be treated with different timelines in order to manage it as per the consent management framework.
So just to help me here, both of you, that when I hear or read the laws, and the DPDP says the liability is always the data fiduciary, right? So let's say two ways, like Nikki mentioned about I have a vendor, but it acts two ways. One, I have a vendor data, so I need to have a consent from the vendor. And second is I am giving my data to the vendor, for it's a KYC vendor or somebody else. Then I'm also passing on my customers' data to the vendors, right? Both ways. So it's like a complex relationship, and that's the reason I'm focusing on this part, so our audience can also get some benefit out of it. So when it comes to manage the POC of vendor, that he or she is similarly a data principal for you. You manage him in a standard way, how you manage it, right? And of course, a lot of things will be covered under the contractual obligations, the DPAs with the vendor. But when the vendor is managing your customer data, for example, let's take a KYC scenario, right? That becomes really critical. So what have you seen? What kind of risks? What kind of consent? Let's be focused on that part today. What kind of consent we have to manage? Like you mentioned, Nakib, in the beginning, there are some check boxes coming in. So if I'm using KYC, I'm using one of the partners. Is that important enough to put in the checkbox, or it should be part of the notice? Because as the end customer or data principal, should I be informed that KYC will be done with my data and by whom, or it should be enough that to say that your data will be shared with third party for KYC? What have you seen? How deep it has to go? Yeah.
No, I think so. Typically, we've actually seen and we've also advised to the extent possible to have like a list of different sub-processors. It's the same approach which you probably see under GDPR.
Yeah,
So
in Europe, we see all the vendor list. Correct.
Exactly. So we've also advised the same, because again, see, I think the law is actually very clear with regard to if you're sharing it with third party, you actually need consent. Now, you can't just say any third party. You'll have to specifically call out which are the different third parties with whom there is a probability that you're gonna share it. See, any tech provider for that matter has multiple sub-processors or processors, sub-processors. Could be cloud service provider, could be any other service provider with whom data is shared. And to a very large extent, at the get-go, it is possible to call out who these sub-processors are. And I think every time you sort of add or you sort of reject, there is a requirement to sort of issue notices saying that these are the changes which are actually happening with regard to sub-processors.
That is clear. That part is very clear. Rahul, I want to also hear 2 cents from you, already 5 minutes per.
So I believe that see, processors are also same like data fiduciary, and equivalent technological and organizational measures need to be adopted by them. Of course, we can say that because of the confidentiality issue, we say that this particular data is being processed by the third party vendor, because I think clear and accurate notice is very much important, as per the section 6 terminologies referred in the act. And telling them very categorically without telling the name of the vendor, we can say that it will be processed, and they will get the equal protection. Because I think technological, and so I think when I have done one compliance for a financial regulator, wherein we have been told that the BGV of the employees will be done by the external third party, then we have very categorically put in the agreement itself that same IAS 27001 norms have to
Yeah.
be taken care of by the processor, because it's a very very passport is there, Aadhaar card is there, everything is
So our
there,
point
driver
is
license.
clear. That what you both mentioned, that has to be categorically mentioned, very clearly mentioned in the contract or into the consent framework, so it's explicitly visible to our data principles. Yeah, I think we will continue the next session. How reliable in Indian context it is. We'll have follow up on it. But I would like to summarize the today's discussion. We're already above the time, so I'll directly move to the last bit of it because time is not key takeaways. So consent is not a regulatory control or UX. That's what we established together with these two gentlemen. Uh, Evidence defines quality audit outcomes. We all just made very clear that what way the evidence has to be collected, from the audit logs to the timestamp, to tag to the specific data principles. All of that detail has to be there. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult in the audit how to manage it. Fragmented consent creates systematic risk. And just, again, if consent is so complex, then answer is directly available that you cannot run it on Excel or three systems running in parallel and then you manage it somehow. So it's not going to happen. So it has to be a centralized system managing the consent for you. And in the next session, we'll also cover consent manager for data principles, because that is going to bring in another level of complexity in the discussion, how to manage it all. And I see a lot of pop-ups coming up. So for the session was very nice. So I will say thank you, everyone. Thank you for the time. And I hope we added some, at least some bit of it in your knowledge. A lot of them is available on the ChatGPT, but gentlemen's knowledge is only here on this webinar. So the live experience is here, what they have seen. So thank you, everyone, once again. And thank you, Rahul, and thank you, Nikki, for your time and making this webinar more valuable. Thank you.
Thank you, Himanshu.
Thank you.